Joanna Naugle, editor of The Bear. You worked on season one. So what were your discussions with Chris Storer like for season two now that you guys have established the style and the pace of the show?
Yeah, it was so fun to come back and feel like we already knew the characters. We had already kind of established the visual language. So coming back for season two, we really just wanted to elevate things. And I think season one focused so much on Carmi and Sydney and Richie, like they were kind of our main trio. And the thing I loved about season two is we got a chance to highlight some of the other characters that I think audience members had really fallen in love with, but we just didn't have time in season one. So we really get to know Marcus more, we get to know Sugar more, we introduce some new characters as well. And so we really just were trying to, show the team coming together and kind of everyone went on their own journeys, kind of became better at all their crafts, and then came together to create this new restaurant, work on something. And at the end of the day, it's a show about teamwork and a show about people coming together. And I love that we have such a great ensemble of characters and actors to draw on because everyone's just so lovable and you're rooting for them all along the way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was one of the things I love about season two. Like, there were so many character-focused episodes about the supporting characters, like Honeydew for Marcus, and obviously Forks for Richie. And the editing style of those episodes are also different from the general Bear style. So what did you guys discuss about, adjusting the style for each character?
Yeah, that was definitely something we had to figure out in the edit room. Marcus's episode, Honeydew, that was directed by Rami Youssef. So it was great to kind of have somebody new come in who knows Chris and knows me and Josh and a lot of people, but brought his own kind of style and take on Marcus's material. And I co-edited that with Adam Epstein, who also has worked on the show since season one. And at first we were cutting things really fast, we had all this loud music, and we're trying to make it really feel like the Bear. And then once we started talking to Chris Storer, the creator of the show, about it, he was like, no, Marcus's episode, this should be meditative, this should be slow. Like even in the crazy chaos at the restaurant, Marcus is always like an island of calm, like he really centers everyone. So we really had to kind of fight our instincts of being like, okay, we want this to feel like it's within the universe of the show, but also feel like we have more time to breathe, focus a little bit more on the processes, on, Marcus taking his time, learning how to become a better pastry chef from Luca. So it was really fun to find that balance. And kind of similarly, the episode before is kind of more Sydney's journey, and we shot that more documentary style with our friends at Supper Club. And so that was almost more open-ended. We wanted to just feel like we were like kind of on the journey with Sydney and seeing like her method of inspiration. And then obviously she comes back to the restaurant and she sees that Carmi's been doing all this stuff without her. So that was also kind of the starting point where it showed Carmi kind of veering a little bit from maybe what Sydney is imagining the restaurant to be. So I thought it was a really bold choice from Chris and the writers to kind of make Carmi almost more, more siloed in this season. Like he's kind of having his own relationship with Claire. He's kind of figuring out, where his passion, lies. He's going through this trauma. And then, everybody kind of comes together in the end. But it's fun to kind of have a moment to highlight everybody else as well.
Yeah. And then he's literally just stuck in the fridge in the finale.
And then at the end, he literally is isolated. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Sunday, the Sydney episode, like there are two great montages, and then the first one when she's just like eating her way through Chicago. And I'm like, how do you have the time to go through yeah, all these different points? But the second one, it's like when she is like trying to come up with a dish, and I feel like, it's kind of hard to convey like her ideas, like in her head, like visually in like what she's cooking, because we don't know what she's trying to make either. So what are the challenges of editing together someone cooking a new recipe?
Yeah, that was really a montage we struggled with a lot because it was so open-ended. I co-edited that with Naya Amani, who's an amazing editor, and she kind of gave me this great assembly with all these different pieces, and we kind of were trying to distill like how do we make it all go together. So it was really looking for like match cuts, and I was thinking about my own creative process, and like as I'm cutting a scene, I'm thinking about like, oh, this reminds me of this movie I saw and I loved, and it also makes me think of this song, but also this thing from my childhood. And I feel like there's all these little like synapses kind of firing in my head as I'm trying to figure out the best way to tell the story. So that's really what we wanted to show from Sydney being on the architecture tour and seeing, the squares of the windows, and that makes her think of ravioli. And then we have this amazing footage of, this like kind of empty black and we wanted that to feel like her imagination. So like that's in this void in her head, and she's like imagining all these pieces coming together. And then by cutting that with, photos of the ravioli she's made, cutting back to dishes she made in season one, Pantone colors, old architecture plans for, the different buildings that she's passing. It was just a way that we were trying to telegraph like all the different things that are going through her head that go into this dish and also seeing those on screen. So it was a very kind of tricky balancing act to edit because you want it to be abstract, but also be able to follow kind of like the line of her imagination, that thread. It definitely took us a lot of variations, but looking for those match cuts to find similar shapes, similar motions, similar colors. That's when it all kind of started gelling together, and it was able to kind of see that through line that was taking us through her journey.
Yeah, sure. Well, you also cut Fishes, which is like the episode of the season that everyone talks about or traumatized by. It's
Yes.
also the longest episode of the series. It's an hour. So did you know in advance? Like, did Chris tell you like this one's gonna be an hour? And like, how did that affect, your approach to it?
Yeah, when we first started the season, and I was reading the scripts, I didn't really have like a heads up. So just like, oh, season 5 ends and it's like Claire and Carmi finally kiss. Oh my gosh, it's so cute. Like, and then I was just like, trauma flashback. And I was just floored by the episode right away because all of these characters, we were introducing a lot of new people. And as I was seeing the dailies come in, I was like shocked by how authentic it felt that all these people knew each other. And if they weren't blood related, at least they've had these like shared histories and are related through, loving each other and calling each other cousin, even if they're not actually. So, yeah, we had talked about this episode being like the most stressful one of the series yet, and how it should just feel like a pot of water that's like bubbling over. And the whole time throughout the episode, we're just trying to make it more and more tense. There's music underneath almost every scene in that episode because we just want it to feel claustrophobic and like distracting, and you just can't like get a moment of relief. You can't get a breath. And then it culminates in this really long dinner scene at the end. And I was really struggling with how to keep that feeling energetic when we're pretty stationary. But luckily, we usually had like 3 cameras roving at once. So I really just was pouring through the footage, looking for all those little reaction shots of like, you hear someone say a line, but then immediately you're seeing how somebody reacts to it. And then, Sugar is looking at Cicero is looking at Carmi's looking down at his plate. Like there's so much information that could be shared just with seeing how everybody is reacting to this horribly tense situation. So it was so fun. I loved being able to push the limits of how stressed we could be, and the performances. I was just so spoiled too.
Yeah, I think it was really effective to see all of their reaction shots at the dinner table because you just see how uncomfortable everyone is and you like feel like
Yes.
something is gonna erupt and then it's the car crash.
Exactly. And we wanted people to just feel like they were at a seat at the table and they
Yeah.
could kind of look around and be like, oh my gosh, like Mikey's looking pretty angry and Lee's really needling him. And, just feeling like it was like, first it feels like a figurative car crash you can't look away from. Then it obviously becomes an actual car crash you can't look away from either.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the bear is the soundscape of the show is also so great because there's so much, obviously just like restaurant noise in the kitchen. And this season they're building the new restaurant, so there's a lot of construction sounds, but also just like the overlapping dialogue and crosstalk. So, what's it like editing like with and around the audio?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely try to make the audio sound as good as we can before we go to the mix. And I think Adam and I do a lot of temp sound work just because that's so important for feeling whether the tension is actually there or not. And we spend a lot of time trying to get those ambiances feeling like they're actually, authentic to the place. In the Christmas episode, we were always wanted to hear someone just off screen, like arguing or telling a story. And we actually reused some of the audio from season 1 of Mikey telling the story to Richie about running into Bill Murray. We were like, oh, that's like a story he would be telling over and over again. Maybe we can take a little bit of that. So it's really fun to find kind of like creative ways to just make it feel really full and well-rounded. And then we have an amazing post-sound team at Sound Lounge. And, we're always like, wow, this is feeling pretty good. We got a lot of stuff. And then we pass over to them and they add even more things and make it sound even better. So it definitely is important to make you feel like fully immersed, and especially for an episode like Fishes, which should just feel like an hour long, panic attack where everyone is drowning. I think why not use everything at our disposal? And so sound is definitely one of those things we leaned into a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I also love the finale because the first, I think, like 12 or so minutes is a oneer, and you're thinking like, oh, this is gonna be like review again in season 1, but then you have to cut once they like Carmi gets locked in the freezer. It's like, what's gonna happen? So, what like, did you guys? discuss that fake out? Like, we're gonna do this one, or was that always in the cards, like with Chris?
Yeah, so that was definitely the intention of, having that be the finale. And they're like, oh, are they gonna do the same trick again? Are they gonna do this? And I thought it was so brilliant where they decided to change from a oneer into fast cutting because it seems like we're about to spiral out of control. Like Sydney's overwhelmed, Carmi's in the fridge, nobody's communicating well. And then the moment where Sydney and Richie are kind of like, you know what, we can't fall into this trap again. We need to take control. That's when we start cutting. And we kept calling that the 5 minute montage because basically they're like, we have 5 minutes to get this together. It's actually longer than 5 minutes, but it's supposed to feel like, the moment of like, okay, we got to get our act together. And as I was showing things to Chris, he was just like, what more can we see? What more can we layer? And so, it's not supposed to be like, okay, all of a sudden they've completely nailed it. It's 100% seamless. It's still a little messy. There's still mistakes being made, but it's supposed to at least feel like, okay, maybe they can do this. Maybe they can pull this off. So it's one of those moments in the season that hopefully everyone is just like cheering them on and like, okay, maybe they can make it happen. And I think because you're lulled into this kind of like long one shot, once we start doing those fast cuts, just that contrast and that like change and the momentum and the acceleration, I think people can feel that even more and it makes it even more exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Joanna, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you back here in a little bit.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joyce.